Christian Parenting.
Welcome to the Called to Love podcast, where we discuss all things adoption and foster care and dive into the practical, the clinical, and most importantly, the biblical perspectives to help you and your family thrive. I'm Summer Colbert, adopted mom, director of adoption and foster ministry, and champion for the Arkansas Baptist Children and Family Ministries. Adoption and foster care aren't just a process. They are both unique invitations to go on a journey with the Lord, where you will experience life-changing opportunities to grow in your faith and learn to love in an entirely new way. One thing is for sure, being called to love means you will never be the same. Hey families, welcome back to Called to Love. Today, I want to take some time just us. It's been a minute as we've had some amazing guests that we have had all kinds of wonderful and encouraging conversations with, but sometimes there's value to just honing in on a particular topic that I know some of you have reached out and asked about. And so today I want to discuss a little bit about parenting our biological, foster, and adoptive kids together as siblings. So there are so many expert opinions when it comes to how we as adoptive and foster parents should approach our parenting when it comes to our biological and our non-biological children. Are there differences? How much attention should we pay to those differences? How exhausting is it for us as parents as we really are well-intended and we're trying to learn all the things and do all the right things and love our kids well and learn the things that we need to help them to thrive in their individual journeys. And the truth is, each of our children, they are unique in their personalities, in their sin struggles, in their bents, in their behaviors, in the way that they communicate, in the way that they relate. And so a lot of times we can get lost in what the experts say. But what I want to bring us back to today is that the Lord has made us experts when it comes to our own children. And so when we are leaning into what we know about our kids, when we are being purposeful to be attuned to our kids and what they need in any given moment and in any given season of their growth and development, we're being good parents as we parent our biological and our foster and our adoptive siblings together. Now, with that, there's going to be some struggles because anytime a kiddo has to share a parent, there's going to be different behaviors that come to light because everybody's fighting for their place in the family. They're fighting to feel loved and valued and cared for, not necessarily because we as parents are doing anything wrong, but because that's just how kids are. They want to be seen, they want to be heard, and they want their voices in the mix of the family unit. So, as we talk about different approaches to connect with our kids, to be attuned to their hearts, and to give instruction that sticks and to disciple our kids in a way that we feel confident that we are doing our job as parents, that's what we're going to talk about. Now, I'm of the opinion that there are some areas that differ in the way that we approach this, and there are others that should not waver in consistency. And we've alluded to this in different conversations in our time together so far on this podcast, but I lean into Proverbs 22:6 that simply says, train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. So while each child requires a personalized approach to aid them in their growth and development, we need to always apply the basic fundamentals of biblical parenting. That looks like safety and provision, discipline, instruction, and connection. This is absolutely what our kids need, regardless of how old they are and where they find themselves in their own growth and development and journey as individuals. Here's something that's really important that I want to communicate. Our kids can see when we're being tossed around by different opinions. Our kids pick up on inconsistency so fast. And so our kids need the security of our confident authority. I'm going to let that sit for just a second. We need to be confident in knowing what God has called us to do as we try to parent purposefully through a biblical lens and with that heart in mind. You know, adoption and foster care is a decision that affects the entire family. And many of us say yes to adoption or say yes to foster care when we already have biological children in our home. And so what does that look like? Well, it requires a dying to self and an extra level of pouring out that we as parents we're doing already just as parents of biological children, but we are also doing that at an extra level for our children who come to us not by birth. And when siblings are involved, it's really important that we pay attention to the effects of the decisions that we make as their parents and check in regularly with each of our children. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I have experienced extreme guilt at how our decision to adopt has affected our biological sons in the past, mostly because I didn't fully understand that my yes is just as much a part of their story as their own individual yes would have been. I mean, the Lord knew that He was going to call us to this journey of adoption, and He knew how all of the ups and downs have affected and will continue to affect my biological children. And it's been really amazing to sit back and watch as they have freely loved and freely said yes and developed a heart and a passion for this calling as well. But going back a number of years ago, I felt guilty. The paperwork, the endless paperwork, can I get an amen? It took so much time and attention away from them. I was homeschooling them at the time, and I was very intense, and I was probably really hard to live with. No, there's not probably to it. I was very hard to live with because I was just so laser focused on getting all of the steps done and taken care of, because I had convinced myself that if somehow I could rush through the paperwork and blow through all of the requirements, that would get a child into our home sooner, that I felt like the Lord had called us to. Well, in the midst of all of that, I wasn't looking at the little lives that were right in front of me that required connection with me, that required sometimes discipline, that required instruction, that required the felt safety of a mom who was attuned to them. And so I got lost in that. And that's something that I have had to wrestle with the Lord on. I've had to ask my boys forgiveness for that. And by the grace of God, they freely gave that forgiveness, but that was still something that really stung for a long time, that I got so focused on that I neglected them. There are a lot of times where, because they weren't making the most noise, I might have assumed that they were okay. They weren't screaming day and night, and so they were dressing themselves, they were going to the bathroom on their own, they were getting their homework done, they were feeding themselves, they were doing all the things. And I had this little life who was depending on me for all of those things and a lot of extra because of her high need when she came into our family, that I just assumed my boys were okay when maybe they weren't at times. They were going through elementary school. They were wrestling with friendships. They were trying to figure out life and doing all the things. And I don't want to paint this picture like I was a completely absent parent, but I think you'll understand the fact that as a mom, I wanted to be all things at all times for all of my kids, which is not a fair expectation, by the way, but that was my mindset. And so I beat myself up for a long time when I could not meet that. Now, fortunately, I have a great relationship with my biological children, and they have a great relationship with their adoptive sister, but it didn't come without bumps and bruises. And that was one of the examples of, hey, I need to be making sure that my boys are okay. My biological children were okay just as much as I was attuning myself to my adopted daughter at the time. My boys lived in an intense environment where their baby sister, who they loved and they were excited to embrace, ended up screaming day and night. And their mom and dad were operating at this high level of intensity and high need for a really extended season. So they could see the stress and the exhaustion in mom and dad, and that affected them. So I had to learn how to release that guilt. I share that personal example just to say, go back to my point that I made a moment ago of adoption affects the entire family. It doesn't just isolate to the mom and dad who say yes. Anyone else who is in the home is affected by this decision to say yes. This is not a discouragement for you if you are listening to this podcast right now and you are wrestling with whether or not to say yes. I can tell you with absolute certainty that God has used our adoption journey and the hard things and the things that my boys experienced and the things that they observed to mold them into the young men that they are today. And it is good. Sometimes going through those challenging situations, no, I'm going to say all the time, God can use all challenges to grow us into exactly who He wants us to be. And I still don't know how that's going to translate for my boys' future in terms of ministry and their heart for others. But I can tell you it's a part of their story for a reason. So don't be discouraged by that. But the fact remains that parenting adoptive and foster children can be challenging and mentally and physically exhausting. And our biological children are barometers that pick up on our stress. So, going back to that attunement conversation and paying attention to, are my kids okay? Are all of my kids okay? Here's some examples of some ways that they can compensate for that stress. Our older kids can compensate by working hard and tasking to help their parents to validate their place in the family or to alleviate some of the stress that we are expressing through our intense reactions, maybe towards them or just towards life in general. They can regress and act out as a means for competing for attention and their place in the family. They can withdraw and become more independent so that they don't feel like they're adding to the burden of their already overburdened parents. Side note and huge disclaimer, this is where the dangers of the online community can really come into play. So please, 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 if you've got older kids, be mindful of their engagement online and if they are withdrawing. That's a huge one. Our younger kiddos who are experiencing the effects of our yes can cry excessively. They can regress in their own behaviors by whining, biting. They can delay or regress in their potty training. They can all of a sudden start to have food issues, and that's a way of them getting attention because mom and dad's going to freak out if I don't eat. So, therefore, if I start to develop any issues with my food, then that might be a means of re engaging focus and attention with the parent. Anything to get unique attention, our kiddos might find themselves in those types of behaviors. Now, none of these are healthy responses, and each one are red flags for us as parents to watch out for. Hey families, did you know that Christian Parenting has an entire online store filled with resources created to help you confidently raise your kids to follow Jesus? And today we want to offer our podcast listeners a special 15% off discount when you use coupon code podcast2024 at checkout. Our Christian Parenting store is filled with products for both parents and kids. These resources will help you pray for your kids, walk through life's ups and downs, and develop great faith habits at home. We have everything from prayer journals for parents, family discipleship tools and activities, and a variety of books. We also have products just for your kids like devotionals and scripture-based cards to stick in their backpacks and lunchboxes. We consider it an honor to provide you and your family the resources you need to build a strong faith foundation. You can visit christianparenting.org/store to see everything that's available, and make sure to use coupon code podcast2024 at the checkout to get your 15% off your order. Now let's get back to the conversation. We don't ever want our kids feeling like they have to be the adults in their home or parent their parents when things are hard. That's a tough one. We can bring our kids along, be honest in our struggles when it's developmentally appropriate, but our kids should never, ever, ever feel like they are responsible for carrying the burden that we said yes to. Now, we're going to take times where we're going to have to rest. We're going to need reprieve. Mom and dad may need to go on a little, trip just to step away and rejuvenate a little bit. And we get the help that we need through counseling, through establishing community with others who are walking in a similar journey to help us go along the way. But our kids should never feel that burden. And that may be a point where we need to pause and we need to ask some hard questions, especially of our older kids, to say, hey, have I made you feel this way? Have our family circumstances made you feel like you need to fill in the blank? I believe that if you are intentional to connect with your kids and to establish trust with your kids, make a safe place for you to hear their honest feedback, they will do so. So don't be afraid. Matter of fact, be intentional to schedule check ins with your kids to make sure that everybody's in a good place. Now, it's not your responsible to make sure that everybody's good and happy all the time either. But it is your responsibility as their parent to acknowledge and to guide them through that and to let them know that you are there and that you are in the journey with them, to walk alongside them, to pray with them, to point you to the Lord, to point them to scripture, whatever that looks like, you're in it with them and that they are not an isolated or separate part of the family because of the calling that you have said yes to. Now, let's talk about responding when behaviors are tough. Again, our kids live with us. They see what goes on better than anybody else. And behind closed doors, that's typically where our kids feel safest to act out, to let out all of their stored trauma, their stored stress of the day. A lot of big feelings and big behaviors can come out behind closed doors, and our kids see that. And how we as parents respond to those behaviors, it's very telling for our other kids in the home. Our words, our body language, and our reactions to our kids that are, we're just going to say extra, that's contagious. So, for example, if we've got a particular child who's just really in a season of struggle with their behavior, they're making a lot of poor choices, they're causing a lot of chaos in the house, and if I'm using words like, oh, here we go again, or that's my problem child, or fill in the blank, or my body language is one of just frustration and resentment and defeat, um, and my reactions are explosive, and that's going to give the other children in the home permission to behave in the same way. And again, parents, this is not easy. It is really, really hard when you're worn down after a long day, after a long week, after a long series of weeks of really difficult behaviors. But it is up to us to maintain that spirit of self control and patience to the best of our abilities. Step away when we have to, but we need to control our words, control our body language, and control our reactions, because the last thing we want to see is those words, body language, and reactions mimicked by other members of the family in the home, because that's really going to cause the child who is experiencing those extra behaviors, those extra responses, those extra struggles, they're going to feel ganged up on and they're going to feel isolated. And so they need unity of care as a family and from their loved ones. If you treat your child like a burden or a problem, their siblings are going to do the same. Now, on the flip side of that, it doesn't mean that we just pretend like it's not happening. We need to be a safe place to ask questions and to talk things out. So, when that child is maybe in bed at night, when they are at school, when they are engaged in another opportunity where it is appropriate, be a safe place for the other children in your home to come to you and say, Mom, I don't understand why so and so is behaving in this way. Dad, I don't understand why this is happening and why you're not disciplining them maybe the same way that as your biological child you disciplined me when I acted like this. Be a safe place to have those conversations with your kids and be intentional to create space to have those conversations with your kids. How we respond to our bio kids when they have questions about their sibling struggles and behaviors is a game changer. Now, let's talk about what is okay to say to our bio kids about their adopted or foster siblings. It's not always appropriate to share every aspect of their trauma or every aspect of their experiences. That's not a burden that our kids need to carry. We need to prepare our responses before a situation escalates. And we do this to protect everyone's heart. So it takes a lot of work on the front end. And we've talked about this in different episodes of we build our toolbox, we prepare ourselves so that our responses and our reactions and our methods are already, they're almost default, because when a situation escalates, our bodies tend to go into this stress response. And when a stress response happens, we're not always thinking clearly, even as the caregiver. So, best practice for us is to prepare our tools, prepare our responses, prepare our methods before an escalated situation takes place. That is also modeling for our kids their responses. So I gave examples of the negative ways that our behavior, our reactions, our words can be impactful on our kids. Now, these are positive ways. If our kids are seeing us default to pause, patience, pulling out the tools that we know have been effective or have been instructed to be effective in particular behaviors, our kids are going to be able to mimic that as well. So, either way, our kids are going to mirror our behavior when it comes to responding to our kids with difficult behaviors. So, which one do we want them to mirror? We can use phrases like, he or she has experienced hard things, and we're working on that together as a family. Or your sibling is learning how to safely behave, or your sibling is learning how to connect. Would you help me with that? Here are some ways that you can help with that. It is not, I repeat, it is not the responsibility of our children to carry the traumatic experiences of their siblings. Just as we protect our adoptive and foster children's stories and manage the details until their hearts are ready and they have reached a developmental maturity to process them, we also guard those details from their siblings. It's not theirs to know. They're not obligated to know, especially at young ages. So we need to teach our adoptive and our foster children to protect their stories and talk about them with safe people. We need to encourage our biological children to do the same because questions are going to come. People are going to be curious. They're going to observe behaviors. So the best thing that we can do is coach the other children in our home to have these default, respectful, and sufficient responses when those questions come up. Now, when it comes to parenting our foster, adoptive, and our bio kids together, you know this, but I think it's worth saying again. Each child has the right to feel seen and safe in your home. You have the benefit of knowing your child better than anyone, recognizing where they are emotionally, spiritually, and developmentally. And as the parent, as I have said all throughout this episode, it's your responsibility to be attuned and purposeful to manage, not control. I want to differentiate between that, but manage and guide the interactions and the relationships within the home. If you try to control everything, you're going to drive yourself and your children crazy. I know, been there, done that, got the t-shirt, went around that mountain several times. Can you tell the Lord's working on me when it comes to control? But as the parent, be attuned to where each of your kids are and be purposeful to manage and guide interactions and relationships between them. And that is going to create a real felt safety and structure in your home to help your kids and your family thrive. So let's start when we're talking about managing and guiding interactions between our siblings. This can start with the basic principles of connection that we can teach to our kids. Teach them to give one another eye contact. Teach them self-control, to keep their bodies to themselves, to respond in ways that are not lashing out. Teach them to listen and speak when it's their turn. Teach them to take responsibility for their own wrongdoing, and teach them to help one another. Other ways that you can create this sense of stability and felt safety in your home is to discipline your kids in private. Don't lash out at one particular child in front of everybody else. Don't explode in front of your kids. Even in those exhaustive moments where you truly feel like you want to give up, don't let your kids see you go there. Step away when you need to. Explain to them that mom needs a moment. Be honest when you need a timeout for yourself. It is okay for everyone to separate, take that time out, and come back together when regulated. These are other really practical ways. I didn't say easy, but these are practical ways that you can begin to establish a felt safety structure in your home when you are parenting foster, adoptive, and biological children together. One of the last things that I want to touch on before we close out our episode today is the inevitable comparison struggle. This is something that is tale as old as time. Why can't you be more like your older brother? Why can't you be more like your younger sister? Well, as parents, let's do better. Let's do our best to create an environment that does not breed insecurity and competition within our family and between siblings. No labels. This is a tough one, even if we're doing it in jest, even if we're teasing. This is my good kid. This is my golden child. This is my perfect child versus the problem child, the troublemaker, the drama queen, etc. Those labels can stick, and kids will start to absorb that identity, and then their behavior will come back and communicate the words that you've spoken into them. So let's be purposeful with our words and use our words to speak life and encouragement and instruction and discipline. Do what you can, mom and dad, and let the rest go. You cannot control your children's choice of interpretation if you have done your best. And what I mean by that is do not carry the burden of trauma and harm that you did not cause in their life. You cannot control their interpretation of their story. Do your best to love them well, to guide them well, and just love them unconditionally, regardless of their choices. Be careful, because comparison can become a manipulation tactic by our kids and our teens. They can pit parents against one another. Don't take the bait. Instead, continue to do your best to remain neutral and reassure each of your kids of their value and their place in the family. Chaos does not have to be the norm in which you function as a family. Yes, with trauma, with the brokenness that comes with adoption and foster care, there is going to be some level of chaos. And quite frankly, some of our kids are comforted by chaos because that's all they've ever known. But they can learn from you and they can join in your calm. And some of the things that we've talked about today can be great starting points to teach them that life doesn't have to be chaos, that there can be order, there can be felt safety and security in their relationships within the home and with you as their parents, as their caregivers. You have the ability to establish an ordered culture in your home with the security of your loving authority in place. So, what stood out to you most today as we talked about the dynamics of parenting your biological, your foster, and adoptive kids together? I would love to hear your feedback. Thank you so much for those of you who continue to submit questions. I'm so looking forward to addressing each and every one of them as we go forward in creating episodes that will benefit you, will encourage you, will continue to give you hope along the way. I tell you, I hate that I can never answer all the questions in one sitting, or that I can't even dive fully into one topic, as we create kind of just these concise episodes to give you a little bit along the way, and we build on that over time. I'm so grateful for each of you who take the time to listen each and every week, and I would love to hear back from you. You can submit a question or any of your feedback in the link in today's show notes, and I look forward to being back with you next week. In the meantime, I'm praying for you. Go embrace your call to love, sweet friends. Thank you so much for listening to Called to Love today. I love to hear from listeners, and so I would love to connect with you to hear your stories and answer your questions right here on the show. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram, send me a direct message, or send me an email at the link in today's show notes. I pray you have been encouraged by today's episode to walk in faith and continue to embrace your own call to love. Until next time, blessings, sweet friends.